All right, so now we're going to talk about this awesome hormone epinephrine even more. So we've talked about this idea that epinephrine binds to its receptor, and specifically it's binding to its beta receptor. And what it does, if it's in a liver cell, it's going to cause a glycogen breakdown, and that's going to release glucose. And that's what you see during exercise, is that glycogen breaks down in the liver, and that causes an increase in glycogen release. Beta receptor also within skeletal muscle is going to cause glycogen breakdown through phosphorylase in the pathway I just described to you. If we then look at a different cell, now the beta receptor is also functioning on these blood vessels, and beta receptor can cause these blood vessels to vasodilate, open. The interesting thing is that if you look on different vessels, and these are, say, in the intestines or in the viscera around your fat and around your kidneys and around your liver, that same epinephrine is now going to bind to a different receptor. It's on the same tissue here in a blood vessel, but now instead of causing vasodilation, it causes vasoconstriction. And so now what we're going to get is we're going to get shifts in blood flow that are based on how much epinephrine is there and whether the epinephrine is binding the beta receptor or to the alpha receptor. And so now it can do really cool things. And so this is how it regulates blood flow, one of the most important things it's going to do. So epinephrine binds to both these alpha and beta adrenoreceptors. The alpha receptors induce vasoconstriction, the beta induce vasodilation. The beta receptors have a higher affinity for epinephrine. So when you have a low amount of epinephrine, you get vasodilation. The thing that happens then as you go with higher and higher exercise intensities, the alpha receptors become stimulated, and now you get vasoconstriction, and that's happening in the viscera. That's actually happening sometimes in the skin. When you get a high enough level of epinephrine, now you can activate vasoconstriction in areas because you don't want blood flow going to your liver, to your kidneys when you're exercising. Because remember, epinephrine is a fight or flight hormone. So you need to either be able to run as fast as you can to survive or to fight as hard as you can to survive. You don't want to be running as fast as you can to survive and have to suddenly pee because you've got lots of blood flow to your kidney. Oh, now I need to pee. Oh, now I can't run quite as fast. Oh, you're going to be dead. You don't survive. So evolution doesn't work that way. So what it does is evolution develops a system where, yes, when you have to run as hard as you can for as long as you can, you don't get blood flow to your kidney, to your intestine, to your liver, because these are areas where you're going to have other problems that come up if you get blood flow to them. But one of the areas where you do constrict flow that maybe you wanted is the adipose tissue that surrounds all of those organs, because then you don't get that increase in free fatty acids. But the reality is what you're doing is you're constricting blood flow pretty much everywhere, even in skeletal muscle. Because if I'm running as hard as I can, I don't need to have lots of blood flow to my shoulders or to my chest or to my back. I want to have blood flow to my legs. So now if I overall vasoconstrict everywhere, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get local regulation of blood flow. Because where I'm using a lot of energy and producing a lot of waste products, those waste products are going to cause what's called reactive hyperemia. Reactive hyperemia is when you get increases in carbon dioxide, in adenosine, and in other waste products that are produced by metabolism, and those waste products cause local vasodilation that overrides the epinephrine effects. And so now you've constricted at very high intensity, you've constricted blood flow everywhere except to the working muscles, because the working muscles are producing waste that are causing vasodilation. And so what happens to blood flow? You go at rest where the majority of the blood flow is in your viscera, your kidney, liver, stomach, intestine, and you shift almost all of that off at maximal exercise. Where does it go? It goes to your muscle. So your muscle blood flow goes from maybe a liter per minute at rest to more than 20 liters per minute at high intensity exercise. Your brain stays constant in the amount of blood flow it gets. Your heart increases blood flow it gets. So what happens? You're shifting blood flow at even high intensity. You're shifting it away from the viscera And even at the highest intensity, you shift it away from the skin. This is one of the reasons why we stop exercising, because as we shift it away from the skin, we can't lose heat anymore. And our core temperature begins to rise. And when our core temperature rises to a certain temperature, now we're going to have to decrease exercise intensity, or we're going to go through catastrophic failure. All right, so what epinephrine is doing, low levels, vasodilation, high levels, vasoconstriction, especially to the viscera. And then locally, you're overriding the epinephrine effect using reactive hyperemia so that you can get an increase in the amount of cardiac output that's going to the working skeletal muscle just by local production of waste products. And those waste products cause an increase in blood flow to the tissues that's working hard so that you can specifically get the right blood to the right spot. All right? Okay. So really what we've talked about in this whole series of lectures is that the fuel you use during high intensity or during any type of exercise is determined by the type of muscle fiber you're using. How big is it? What's its mitochondrial mass? What's its metabolic enzyme content? And what's its metabolite content? So does it have glycogen? Does it have intramuscular triglycerides? How many mitochondria does it have? All of those things go into which fuel you're going to use. Sympathetic nervous system activity is huge. I talked about epinephrine a huge number of times in this series of talks, simply because it regulates so much about metabolism. And so as you raise sympathetic nervous system activity, it's going to shut blood flow down to your fat, so you don't get fatty acids. It's going to increase glycolysis or gluconeogenesis or glycolysis. Oh my God. Glycogenolysis, there we go. The breakdown of glycogen to produce glucose 6-phosphate. And as it does that, you're going to flood the system with glucose, and now you're going to shift metabolism towards carbohydrate. Diet is going to be important because if you're on a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet, you're going to use more carbohydrate. If you're on a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, you're going to use more fat as a fuel. And then blood flow is going to be supremely important because the blood flow is going to determine which fuels you have. Because as we're going to see later, if you have no blood flow to the liver and the kidneys, you can't take all those little 3-carbon sugars and convert them back into glucose so that you can use glucose as a fuel. And so you lose gluconeogenesis. So that means that you're going to shift fuel utilization again. All right? And that also means that lactate is going to rise faster than if blood flow continued to your liver and kidneys. All right? So all of these things contribute to which fuel you use during exercise. And it's really the core of what that Roman paper says is that exercise intensity in general shifts towards carbohydrate away from fat utilization in what's called the crossover. So that fat utilization goes down and there's a crossover point where you cross over from fat use to carbohydrate use at a specific intensity. And what we do with our training is we shift that back and forth. We either use more fat if we have more mitochondrial mass, or we use more carbohydrate if we have less mitochondrial mass, or we're going at a higher intensity.